Working with a black and white image, what I wanted to do next was talk about some of the ways to convert and create a black and white image, some of the different things to consider from a workflow standpoint when we're working with a black and white image, and then some of the things to think about from an artifacting standpoint, how you prevent some of those larger artifacting issues to show up when we're preparing for a digital negative. Now, if you already have a preferred method for creating a black and white image, that's great. Most standard black and white image conversion processes work fine. There is nothing secret about, oh, you need to use Camera Raw's black and white conversion to get a good negative to work with. As long as you have a good black and white image to work with, any conversion process will work. That being said, I do think there are some subtle benefits to some things and some of the tools that are available that might make it a little bit easier if you haven't started working with a black and white image, or if you're thinking about dealing with some of the issues as you start to print and you think, wow, this just has a little bit of a digital-esque feel to the historical print, and I would kind of like it to have kind of more of a film look to it. Or in my case, one of my biggest challenges has been I've been shooting large format, and I love large format, I still shoot large format, but if I'm putting a show together and I'm putting 10 images together and 5 are digital and 5 are film, I don't want people to walk through and be like, film, film, digital, 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 film, film, up to however many I actually said I had 10, and I lost my math there. But I don't want them to be able to sell that. So there's some things that I attempt to do to kind of make the images look consistent from print to print. The other piece that I would recommend you do before you start spending a lot of time on the digital side, before we jump into this, is print your black and white photograph as a black and white photograph out or whatever printer you have. Because it is really easy when you're on screen to think your image looks awesome, and when it comes out of the printer, you're like, that no longer looks awesome. Now, whether it's a color management issue, whether it's just your monitor is really bright and has a lot of contrast, so it's coming out of the printer a little flat, ultimately what comes out of your printer is going to be closest to what the image is going to look like from a digital negative printing, historical printing process. So it's worth spinning the piece of paper to be like, oh, because if it comes out of the printer and you're like, that looks really flat, and I don't like the look of that, you'd be better off fixing it at that point than starting to work through the actual analog coding process, because then you've got more time invested before you'd recognize that the print was off. Now, that doesn't mean that it's always going to be perfect, but that's, I think, a good step I would take to avoid that. Color management is still critical when we're working in this historical process. We still have to have proper color management. So if you don't have a X-Rite or a data color, something to calibrate your monitor with, it is worth the $120, $150 to get that. Your photography in general will just be exponentially better if you're in a color managed workflow. But we really need to be in a color managed workflow when we're in a digital negative space for a couple of reasons. One, we're going to be converting images from black and white to color. No, we're going to be converting them from color to black and white. So we want to deal with a large amount of color to make that conversion. The other piece is we want to make sure that our grayscale value, which is something most people don't ever worry about setting, gets set. I'll show you where that is in a second. In general, when we're working with black and white images, Adobe RGB will provide essentially all the grayscale values we need. My normal photography is done in ProPhoto. So I still do all of my black and white conversion in ProPhoto, but nearly all of my digital negative work is done with Adobe RGB. In the interest of full disclosure, I am currently playing with, is it better to stay in a complete ProPhoto workspace through the entire process, or is it worth the hoop I'm jumping through for the Adobe RGB? The jury's still out. I've got about 5 people helping me test. We're looking at a bunch of different things. And I'll explain to you in a second what that is. But for now, everything in the bonus materials, all the instructions, everything is about the Adobe RGB 1998 color space. Under color settings, under the edit menu, whether you're in Windows or on a Mac, you get the color settings up. You've got the working spaces here. This working space is set for Adobe RGB. This is normally, for me, would be set for ProPhoto. That's the normal working color space for all of my photography. Down here is the gray value. So this is what determines how the grayscale images are built within the photograph. Adobe RGB is attached, its default gray gamma is 2.2. ProPhotos is 1.8. So if you click in here and you see gamma gray 1.8, if I'm in the ProPhoto color space, I set my gray working space to the 1.8 value. If I'm in Adobe RGB 1998, I set it to 2.2 because those are the spaces that those two larger color spaces use for their gray values. The reason that's important is when we build the step wedges and when we build our known grayscale values to start working on the digital negative process, if I choose 2.2 but my file is set up for 1.8, my numbers won't match, or vice versa. So we want to be consistent with this workflow. So if you're already in an Adobe RGB workflow, just make sure your gamma gray is set for 2.2. If you're going to stay with ProPhoto, make sure you're set for 1.8, but know you're going to need to do a little bit of recalibration of the curves if you're going to use mine because they were set for 2.2. Either process works great. I've got beautiful images out of either workflow. The reason it's out of the Adobe RGB 1998 is all of the digital negative work for the last 20 years. Nearly everybody's worked in the Adobe space. So all the shared curves, shared information, instructions are in that space because of the black and white grayscale value. To show you that, I've got a color image, I've got an image here, and this is, if it turns on here, it always thinks for a second. This is the sRGB volume of color. This is a tool called Color Think. It lets me load up an image and show you what the color looks like. This particular image is the color space in these flowers. In this flower. So this is the color volume for an sRGB file. Now give me back my little picker. This is the color volume for a ProPhoto color space. And you're going to see how much larger that space is as soon as it renders. It's got a significant larger volume of color that I'm able to work with. Okay, so there's sRGB, there's ProPhoto. So if I'm making the conversion to black and white, and it's all about tonal relationships and color relationships of those, the hue relationships of those colors, if I have a larger color space to work with, I just have more tones to manipulate. So that's why I like the ProPhoto space. I like the RGB space over sRGB because I get a bigger color space. I get more information to make the conversion with. So I want those larger spaces. Now, I'm going to zoom in here. Let me turn that on. Here is, if you look right there, you'll see some little lines appear. See how the line kind of fattens up? That's the grayscale values. So that's the black and white version of that. That L right there is the luminosity of the image, which is all black and white is values of luminosity. So that's why if I'm using Adobe RGB, ProPhoto, and once I make the black and white conversion, I have nearly every piece of data I would need in that Adobe RGB space. That's why I'm comfortable using that for my digital negative space. That's why I've chosen that color space for the workflow. Is that's not like dealing with color where I'm losing huge volumes of color. I'm dealing with just the luminosity values that are within there.